Okay, we started.
Welcome to our second annual Apologetics Conference, Day 3. My name is Davies Kelmen. I'm one of the founder members of Apologetics Kenya. Today we are tackling the topic of gender identity and sexuality. But before we begin tackling the topic, I want to just tell us a little bit about who Apologetics Kenya is. Apologetics Kenya is a Christian apologetic ministry that was started in the year 2017. And basically our goal is to engage skeptics and non-believers and just basically be able to engage people with different worldviews, especially in post-colonial Kenya, as well as post-modern Africa. And we do this through lectures, we visit campuses, we do debates and other outreaches and engagement. We also have online YouTube ministry. Today, Day 3, we are going to be hosting. Let me just give you a little bit of culture of Ratio Christi in the University of KwaZulu-Natal at Pietermaritzburg since 2017. He has published more than 100 peer-reviewed papers and was awarded 26 Professor is married to Miranda and has 2 sons, Joshua and Nathan. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's wonderful to host you. Like to hear the presentation that you have for us today, after which maybe we will engage you with a couple of questions.
Great. So I'm going to dive straight into that. Thank you for this opportunity again. Let me just share my screen quickly with you guys. All right, are you able to see that?
Yes, we can.
So thank you again for this opportunity. I'm going to be speaking on the issue of gender. And I'm going to be taking anesthesia. I first want to just run through some of my credentials so that we understand where I'm coming from. I am a medical specialist. I'm a specialist anesthetist, and I've subspecialized in critical care with a PhD in anesthesia. I hold a master's in healthcare research methodology from McMaster University, which is a specialization in the how to do research, evaluate the quality of research, synthesize it, and treating persons with gender dysphoria. And this presentation is not clinical advice. How should we live? Why am I here? What's wrong with the world? And how do we fix it? the Christian worldview what is our purpose? What we fix it? And Christianity has a set of answers that we believe is based in reality that answers those questions. And one of the critical issues around the question of sex and gender is what is a human being? We are provided with a biblical framework, but we are also able to intuit a moral law framework that allows us to understand what is a human. So if I have a look at the biblical framework, God says that humanity is a creation of God. So we are creature, we're not God himself. We are made in the image of God, a mix of both matter and spirit. And the philosophical term for that is holomorphism. We are not just spirit, which would be something like an angel. We're not just matter, but we are this unique mixture of the two. And we are uniquely relational. We are made in the image of God, and there's something about his relationality is reflected in our relationships. Another important concept to understand about humanity is that we are considered to be, we are not in our bodies, we're not born into a body, we are our bodies. So when you think about it, you're busy eating or drinking. I am eating, I am drinking. It's not that my body is drinking or that my body is smelling or experiencing something. And this is an important concept to understand, that we are part of a whole. We are a whole. We're not like little passengers running around inside this physical shells of ours. So linked to this is the question, what is the purpose of humanity? Well, God creates humanity in his image to share a relationship with God, and then to share a relationship with each other. And it is in this process that God said, it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make a helper suitable for him. And God creates both male and female. Which brings us to this question of sex. What is the purpose of sex? I think sex reflects the intimacy of the Trinity. There's a oneness that we experience through sexual intimacy. Sex also reflects the union of Christ and the church. Intimacy sex has the role of intimacy and pleasure between two partners, and closely linked to that is the procreation and family. Okay, so that's our introduction, that's our beginning, sort of the Christian quick overview of what is this issue of gender, what is this issue of sex. So let's get down to a little bit of more technical details. So when you look at biology, there is no discussion that there are two sexes. There is male and female, and they are defined as such because the female provides an ovum, an egg, the male provides sperm. When these two join together, you get procreation, you get a new member of the species being generated. That is the very essence of sex, is that there is a genetic reproduction that can happen as a result of these two states of being, both female and male. XX in the human chromosome is the marker for a female, and XY for a male. It's an important differentiation to make, that you get abnormalities of sexual development, disorders of sexual development. And these things in the technical terminology are called DSDs. In the past, we called them intersex, but it failed to capture a lot of the other clinical conditions around that. And so we now call them disorders of sexual development. These must be differentiated from issues of transgenderism or gender dysphoria and those type of things. There's two broad categories. One is genetic and one is hormonal. So if we look at the genetic side of things, males are generally XY and females are XX. And you can get genetic abnormalities where the chromosomes are incompletely transmitted, or there's abnormalities with the development. If you're missing one of your X chromosomes, you end up with XO, which is Turner syndrome. So it's a female with a specific set of clinical features, and a presentation. Trisomy X is we have 3 X chromosomes, and Klinefelter syndromes 2 X and a Y. So these are clearly defined, well understood abnormalities of sexual development. If you've got a normal set of hormones, you can still have abnormalities of sexual development. If you have abnormalities in how the body makes or responds to those hormones. So you patient who's genetically male, XY, and then they can suffer from a testosterone insensitivity or a failure to make it. These are called 5-alpha reductase deficiencies or androgen insensitivity syndrome. So these persons will be genetically male and will look like a female as a result of the lack of response to the testosterone. This also happens on the female side. So you can have a genetic female, XX, but as a result of abnormalities in their adrenal glands, they will have an excess amount of testosterone in their body, and they will present as masculine or as male. All right, so as we talk about sex and gender, just keep in mind these developmental disorders, disorders of the sexual development or intersex, and realize that they're not the same concept. So let's focus a little bit on this idea of gender identity and gender dysphoria. So here are a few definitions, just so that if you're new to the subject, you've got a sense of where we're going. Gender, these are feminine or masculine characteristics that are associated with or differentiate between male and female. There is a cultural context. In certain cultures, a male might wear a certain, behave a certain way, wear certain clothes. Females in a different culture will wear a different set of clothing. But the gender is an expression of the biological sex. Gender identity is my own personal sense of my gender. I feel male, I feel female, or I feel neither male nor female. Gender expression is how you express your gender, how you show it to the rest of society. So you get gender associated behaviors, mannerisms, appearances, and they are culturally sensitive, or they're dependent on what the culture is like. But they're not fully dependent on the culture. They emerge out of your biological reality. And we have the categories of being female or being male as the two options. And that has a cultural context. In addition to that, you get that expression is generally in 2 categories, either of being feminine or masculine. So I'm going to give you a 4-point framework around which to approach this, or to think about the concepts of gender dysphoria, transgenderism in our society. And I think it's quite important to try and be very careful about how you talk and think about it. There's a tendency to conflate philosophical or ideological issues when talking about the person, or import these things when you're talking about the medicine side of it. So being careful on how we present it is quite useful in furthering conversation with other people. So starting off with the person or the individual, gender dysphoria is an intense unease experienced by somebody who has a perceived mismatch between their biological sex and their self-understood gender identity. So they are biologically, for example, male, XY, but they understand themselves to be female gender. This is a fairly rare condition associated with extreme depression, anxiety, high levels of suicide, around 30 to 40%, and has an incredibly debilitating impact on the person's day-to-day activity. If somebody is transgender, they are consistently and persistently and insistently expressing a cross-gender identity. So they dress in the cross-gender form. So if I'm male, I'll dress as a female. If I'm female, I'll dress as a male. I'll speak, I'll act out the opposite gender. If you look at the history of gender dysphoria, historically the ratio in men was between 1 in 20,000 to 3 in 20,000, and women 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 30,000. So a very, very rare entity, not seen often. As I've mentioned, if you look back in the history around the 1930s, 40s, we start to see medical reports of patients with gender dysphoria, started presenting to psychiatrists and psychologists, and the data shows that in these patients, the rate of suicide was, as I said, in the region of 30 to 40%, a profoundly debilitating state for these persons. So much so that they end up seeking help, then presenting to psychiatrists, and there was attempts to try and help these individuals overcome this dysphoria. How do we make it better? How do we improve their day-to-day functioning? So this included psychotherapy, which many studies found was not very successful. And then clinicians thought, well, if we then move the patient towards the gender that they identify with, perhaps there will be some degree of psychological relief of the psychological distress. And that took on the role of social transitions. So if I'm a male, I start presenting myself in society as a female, then hormonal therapy to first block my own hormones and then take cross hormones, and then later to undergo surgery to make me physically match my gender of choice. All right, so first, that's the person or the child. So let's look at the medicine. So just remember that all of this starts with an individual, a child or an adult in front of you struggling with this concept of gender dysphoria. So those initial early strategies from the medical side, transition both social, then giving patients medication, hormonal therapy, and then surgery, showed very poor outcomes and high suicide risks. In a very well-known study conducted in Sweden, where they followed the patients for a 10-year period, there wasn't a very good or a large improvement in suicide rates, and you're looking at around about a 3 times higher fold risk of suicide of death compared to controls, and a 19 times higher rate of suicide. So quite a significant impact on those patients, despite the treatment strategies that they were following. Clinicians then looked at this problem and said, look, we need to do something different. What can we do to improve outcomes on our patients? And one of the key components of these patients is that they have a desire to pass as a member of the other sex. So when we're very good at identifying male or female, so it's hard to get somebody to pass as female if they're fully grown, large shoulders, strong jaw, all the male characteristics. So the thought was, if we could initiate therapy earlier on these patients before they enter into puberty, perhaps we can get better outcomes. And based on research initiated by a group in Holland and the Dutch, a protocol has been developed called the WPATH guidelines. So these are the standards of care for health and transsexual gender non-conforming people, and it's presented by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And they will take a child diagnosis of gender dysphoria and go through social and psychological interventions, make sure that the diagnosis is clear, that other psychopathologies are identified, and then initiate social transitioning early at the age of about 9, 10. And then before the child enters into the second stage of puberty, so this is the development of breast buds in a girl or enlargement of the testicles and penis in a boy, the patient will go onto puberty blockers. This happens at the age of about 9 to 12, depending on when that starts. Then at the age of 6, they will start taking cross-sex hormones, and then at the age of 18, they'll go undergo surgery. And this showed in early results to have very good outcomes for the patients, because they didn't go through the full puberty development, and so were able to pass as the sex of that. So this is the model that is followed routinely in most sexual and sex clinics or clinics, child psychology units that treat patients with gender dysphoria. The problem with this is that with this shift to early treatment of gender dysphoric children, the studies have shown that not every child that presents with gender dysphoria during childhood persists with that gender dysphoria into adulthood. So in the past, we were seeing adults with established gender dysphoria. They were obviously children at one stage, who also had gender dysphoria. But when you look at data of patients presenting to a clinic with dysphoria, between 65 to 85% of those children will not retain that dysphoria. As they enter into adolescence, the dysfunction will go away. And that obviously raises questions about what happens. Are we starting interventions and therapies on children who might not need it, who will not grow out of this as they go through puberty? There's concerns about the adverse impact of puberty suppression. As I've said, there's the possible inappropriate treatment of children who would desist, who would no longer persist as with gender dysphoria. What is the effect of puberty suppression on the child's health, on their psychology, on their psychosexual functioning? This is a very new topic. We're looking at 1930s, 40s, where the first case reports start coming through, 1970s, 80s, first wave of attempts of trying to help transitioning of patients. Going into now, there's been an explosion in this research. But that means that there's very little data that supports these interventions. This has recently been published or been brought to the world's attention by publication from the Swedish Health Technology Agency, the UK NICE, which is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, and also Cochrane reviews. And all of these show that there's a profound lack of evidence supporting these interventions. Most of the studies are uncontrolled. They are observational studies, which are prone to bias. There's very insufficient evidence to determine the efficacy or safety of these events. The data is of very low certainty, and nobody has an idea of what the long-term side effects of these interventions are. What's also created quite a lot of concern recently is that there's been a massive shift in the population, the patient population presenting to gender clinics. It was predominantly in the past been male, small numbers, but in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a surge in older adolescents, predominantly girls. And the mechanism of what is driving this presentation of yet to never seen before type of process, nobody's really sure about that. There's a lot of concern that this might be an outworking of the effect of social media and a strong media presentation of patients who've gone through gender change and transsexualism. A concept called rapid onset gender dysphoria, that terminology has recently been coined, and it refers to adolescent girls with no previous reports of gender dysphoria in their psychosocial history, all of a sudden presenting or to clinics or making this claim that they suffer from gender dysphoria. Very atypical. It occurs in clusters, and it's possibly driven by social media or an effect of their peers. A very interesting book has recently been written by a woman called Abigail Schreier, and she talks about the irreversible damage the transgender craze seducing our daughters. So who does these transitions? Who's the doctor that is actually doing the surgery? Well, the caricature is that if you do this, you are a left-wing, liberal, anti-religious, radical transgender ideologue. But I think that fails to do justice to the individuals working in this field. Predominantly, I would say that these are clinicians that are deeply invested in the patient that is in front of them. They really do have a desire to see the person that is suffering in front of them with a high risk of suicide have a better result, a better life. These clinicians act as the patient's advocate, and they will do their utmost to obtain the best outcome for those with the problem. Of course, the counter is that who raises concerns about the quality of this research? Well, the caricature of that is that if you disagree with the standard narrative, you're a right-wing conservative, transphobic, homophobic, religiously motivated clinician. But again, as I say, that's a caricature. Persons who are concerned about this are predominantly focused on the long-term outcome of these patients. We understand that you want to deal with the problem that's in front of you, but what is the impact on those patients who potentially don't have the gender dysphoria? What is the risk of the long term of these patients? These clinicians are really trying to do their best to obtain that, to make sure that we have the best broad outcome across society. Right, let's drill down a little further. What about the local community or your country or your society that you're in? This is a reality that we will be facing, that we are facing, is that there will be trans persons in your school, in your work, in your society on a day-to-day basis. They have a right to existence, and particularly in South Africa, a right to expression of how they wish to express their gender identity. There's a call for us to accept that reality and then to engage in a meaningful, useful manner with them. That has implications for us on what about transgender persons in sport? Compete or don't they compete? Which bathrooms do they use or don't they use? How do they dress? What language can they ask or demand that we use? He, she, they, pronouns, the actual names. How are we going to negotiate an interaction with one another to make sure that we have a society in which, a pluralistic society in which individuals are respected and protected? And then my fourth point, as we think about this as a framework, is the framework of the philosophy or the ideology that underpins this point. Now, your worldview, the way that you think the world works, your philosophy, your worldview philosophy underpins your every thought. It provides a framework by which you make sense of the world around you. What we believe to be true, we act on, and those actions are creates a society around us. When I speak about the philosophy or the ideology of transgenderism, I just want to again point you back to the steps that we've taken. I've taken you through the individual, and I've taken you through the medicine, and I've spoken to you about the society. But I'm now specifically speaking about the ideology or the philosophical movement that calls itself transgenderism, which is different from a transgender individual. They may have overlap, but conceptually, this is what I'm focusing on. The concept of transgenderism has its origin in postmodernism. It seeks to provide a paradigm for understanding human sexuality and identity. It's trying to answer the question, what is real and what is humanity? And as you study more of it, you understand that it actually seeks to function as an all-encompassing worldview, which is the equivalent of a belief system. At its center, it has a subjectivism. It says what we experience is truth. And it seeks to conform reality to what's happening in your mind. Because it originates out of postmodernism, it is very skeptical of reason, logic, and empiricism. So in many ways, it's anti-science. And it seeks to deconstruct science and the traditional empiric ways of thinking and engaging in the society. When transgenderism speaks about gender, in difference to what I have done, it believes that gender, the concept of gender, is a completely socially constructed concept. It has no biological grounding at all. When we talk about gender, we're engaging in word games, which is drawn from the postmodern philosophy. And as I've said, it's totally decoupled from biological sex. And because of that, it is totally decoupled from reality, which anchors biological sex. The most interesting and I think the most dangerous components of transgenderism and this ideology is that it has taken postmodern philosophy and it's added a moral component onto it, a moral imperative. Transgenderism seeks to be normative, which means that it says it doesn't just examine things and leave it as it is, which is empiricism. It says we must change what is into what should be. So there's a deep moral impetus, force that drives transgenderism, and it compels compliance, and it will manipulate systems and organizations to achieve its ends. And drawing on a lot of the work from Marcuse, it undertakes radical activism. So it's structured and planned activism to seek to punish those and destroy those that are in opposition, and to gain and to achieve its ends in its normative attempts. So when we think about that, I want to ask, what is the nature of reality? Now, that type of question has been asked a lot in the past, and all the way back to the Greek philosophers Aristotle and Plato. Is what is around us real, the absolute, which is realism, or is the mind real, the absolute, and it creates, or it identifies the physical world around us, which is idealism? And at this core of the transgenderism is this concept that what you think you are, you are. But is it true that what you think you are, you are? So if I say I am a cat, does that make me a cat? Or if I think I am a dog, am I a dog? Am I really a dog? Does my nature, being my physical reality, change as a result of my thought processes? If I think I am fat, does it make me fat? Am I fat? There is a medical condition known as anorexia. It's a dysfunction in the mind where individuals will believe, particularly women, will believe that they are fat, that they don't look good, that they need to lose weight in an attempt to make themselves look better. They will literally starve themselves to death in an attempt to reconcile their body with what's happening in their mind. This is one of the other psychiatric conditions that has some of the highest suicide rates or mortality rates, not really suicide, mortality rates in it. Similar to this is a concept called, or disorder called, body integrity identity disorder. Here, individuals believe that a part of their body is wrong and needs to be corrected or removed. This lady grew up with the dysfunction in her mind that she needed to be blind. She wanted to be blind. And she finally got somebody to pour an acid into her eyes to destroy her eyes so that she could be blind, and so give psychological relief to this distress that she had. There have also been quite a few reports of individuals of body parts to help them deal with psychological distress of having an intact body. There's also been individuals that have felt self-identified as somebody of the opposite race. This is Rachel Dolezal. She believed, she grew up as a Caucasian female, but self-identifies as an African-American female, and presented herself to the world as such until she was discovered and then widely vilified for her actions. If you can be whatever you think you are, then what about transspeciesism? So this gentleman identifies as a dog, and when he comes home, dresses in a dog suit and drinks out of a bowl and asks to be called Boomer, the dog. And in its extreme, you get individuals which have identified with mythical creatures such as dragons, less mythical as cats. When you look at this philosophy, you know, when you start to play it out and to follow it to its natural conclusions, you start to see that there's something profoundly wrong with this. It just doesn't correlate with reality. It leads to quite profoundly strange outcomes. The transgenderism philosophy, as relates to gender dysphoria, says that because I think I am a girl, I am a girl. the thought process makes me a girl, and I should be treated as a biological female. Similarly, because I think I am a boy, I am a biological boy, and I should be treated as a biological boy. All right, so we've touched on sex, the biblical components of sex and gender. We've looked at disorders of sexual development. We've gone through the gender dysphoria concept and have had a look at that on the level of the individual, the medicine, of the society, and then the philosophy. But as we sort of move towards the end of this discussion, I want to give you a framework on which we can engage, and I hope would become a useful way to coordinate some type of response to this. So again, it's a four-point framework, and it follows the same outlay as I've gone through now. So first starting off with the individual or the child. When faced with somebody who is expressing a transgender identity or is struggling with gender dysphoria, our aim, our calling as Christians is to build true friendships with these individuals, as we would be building true friendships with everybody else. We are called to demonstrate God's love as Christ did to these persons. There is intrinsic value in every person. Jesus Christ died for them. God created them. They have value and they should be treated as such. When engaging with them around the use of names or pronouns, I think you need to be wise on it. If you are not in a position of a close relationship with that individual, it's not up to you to call out it's not your responsibility to call out the sin in their lives. Walk past somebody in the street and start hurling abuse at them. But in individuals in which you have a close relationship and there's an element of trust, there's an opportunity to engage in discussion around it. One guy says, don't put the family rules on those outside the family. If you are not a Christian and you don't follow Jesus Christ, the rules, instructions that Christ places on us have no meaning to those individuals. They have no hold on them. What we are called to do is to make Jesus the issue. We are not lost because we don't dress right. We are lost because we do not have Jesus Christ as our Lord and as our Savior. That is what will save us first. Once Jesus is at the center, then the other things can be addressed and fall into place. So there is a strong need for us to realize this. And this doesn't just count with transgender persons. It counts with every individual that we engage with. We are all broken in some specific way. You will know exactly how you are broken. You know, we have found our identity in money or sex, power, position, achievement, how many friends you've got on Facebook, how many publications you've had, the car you drive, the way that people see you. But instead of building our identity, we instead build our identity on this, instead of building our identity on Christ. And so Christianity is able to provide a unique solution to the issue of transgenderism. We are able to receive a new identity in Christ, something that is transcendent, something that goes beyond our sex or our money or our cars or our achievements. In Jesus Christ, there is everything. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, if anybody is in Christ, a new creation has come. It's gone and the new is here. That is a promise nobody else can deliver. No other religion can deliver. It is only to be found in this. That is what we are to share and deliver to the rest of society. The second point, is we need a Christian basic understanding of what the issues are. Understand why clinicians are doing what they are doing. I think there is an opportunity for us to advocate nationally, both through doctors' organizations and civil society, to put some type of oversight and reporting system in place on people, on doctors doing or being involved with the transitioning of children from one sex to another. The research is very poor, it is very experimental, it's very new, and a centralized authority allowing oversight of that, allows data to be collected, should be run in clinical trials so we can see what the outcomes are. One of the first principles in medicine is first do no harm, don't harm the individuals. And that is doubly so important when it comes to children. Recent publications from quite a few hospitals in Europe have said that they are now going to be delaying hormonal therapy in children under the age of 16 as a result of the concerns about the quality. And I think there's a role, I'm going to be taking that on in South Africa, but in other countries as well, for us to advocate that these type of guardrails to be put in place within a country. What about the loyalty in our society? We live in a shared society, particularly here in South Africa. It's broadly pluralistic. There's a lot of different religions, viewpoints. Compelled by Christ and by what he did to show respect to all around us. For Christ's love compels us because we are convinced that one died for all and therefore all died. And he died for all. That they live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. The overriding principle that we deal with one another in a society is one of respect. But respect in a pluralistic society requires the recognition and the balancing of a broad set of rights and responsibilities. So a child in a school has the right to autonomy and to self-expression, but the individuals, other children in that school have a right to privacy. And we need to sit down and think before it comes and lands on your desk or on, in your personal space. How are we going to work in your social interactions at the schools? Practically, I think it is a good principle to follow that reasonable requests should be accommodated. But how does it work out? Practical rights. So bathrooms, change rooms. Is a boy who identifies as transgender, who is at the age of 12, is he allowed to go into a girl's change room and then change there in front of other girls, biological females? Does that violate the privacy and potentially the right to protection of those girls? Does that mean that the boy needs to go into the boys' change rooms where he feels threatened? Or is an alternate solution to have unisex bathrooms, change rooms, where that type of process is avoided? What about clothing? If you wear school uniforms, how do you dress? Sport, can the child participate in the school? Is the transgender boy allowed to participate provincially, internationally? What about pronouns and the names that are used when talking to these individuals? Do you call them on their name because they request it? Do you call them on the name because you're compelled to do so? And these rights need to be balanced and need to be discussed and need to be prepared so that we understand how to engage with them in advance. Issues of privacy, freedom of speech, fairness, and the recognition that there are multiple parties. There is the transgender individual, there is the children around it, there's the parents, there's the school, there's the teachers in school. All those need to be balanced in a thoughtful and logical way. We need to train people in understanding these issues. School governing bodies, teachers, lecturers, students, how to defend rights, how to engage in advocacy and litigation if needed. Then finally, the philosophy, ideology side of the things. We need to, in some ways, grow up. We need to teach the foundational Christian truths. We need to understand who God is, why he created, who we are, what is man. But there is a need for a bit of seasoning with Christian philosophy. so that we can engage and be inoculated against these concepts. What is the real? What is ontology? How do we know truth? Can we know truth? What is humanity? And I think that there's a big call on the church to engage in training, both of itself and those around us, so that we are wise on how to deal with this. And I think for the most part, we haven't done a very good job of preparing around these issues. And that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm happy to take some questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I was mesmerized. Along the way, I had some questions myself, but somehow you ended up answering most of them. But a few still are lingering. Thank you for a wonderful, well-researched presentation. Now, here's my first question. How do we preach the gospel to these people? Just think for example, individuals, as you have said, that you do not go and tell them you are a sinner because perhaps you have not established trust, you have not established a relationship with them, but still we are called by Jesus Christ to go to the world and preach the gospel. How do we approach that?
Well, I think you approach that in the same way as you approach your engagement with the person who works next to you who doesn't believe in Jesus Christ. The mistake that we make, I think, is that this person is transgender and you put them in a different category all of a sudden. So I would ask you, how do you engage with the gay individual? How do you engage with the Muslim? How do you engage with the atheist? That engagement is the same when you engage with a transgender person. I don't think that there's a difference in the methodology or the process. What we are called to do is present Jesus Christ crucified. We're not told to identify the sin in the person's life and then get them to repent of that sin. You repent of sin, you submit to Jesus Christ, and then the rest will come or need to be dealt with and move into line. So what I always say is, I just take this down to myself. My sin was one of pride, is one of pride and arrogance. And I am able to run my own life and do it my own way. So the question is, how do you do with me? Well, God sent people across my way. God led me to the point where it destroyed my life. And sitting in the pigsty, I realized that the Father was waiting for me, that Jesus Christ was my Savior. So that is the path that those around us will walk. And that is the approach that we need to take. So sometimes that question is better taken and just said, how do we engage with people that are lost in general? And that protocol, that 5-step process is very useful to engage with anybody around
you. How about for preachers in the pulpit, especially when this issue, begins to become prominent in our societies as we are seeing now? How should preachers then, what sensitivity should they adopt as they preach in the pulpits?
Well, I would argue that what we have done up to now has been superficial. It's very easy to identify a sin and then to attack it. But if you have a look, the framework that I've used now, that I've presented now, could very easily be a 4-part series in a church, over 4 weeks in sermons in a church. How do we engage with the individual? How do we advocate for a just medical system in the country? How do we engage with one another in a pluralistic society? How do we develop and grow our understanding of God's nature and philosophy? Now, the standard way that the church historically has approached this is done one or two things. It's pointed a finger and attacked, or it has run away and it is hidden. I think what it has failed to do is to be what Jesus is. Jesus was both the lion and the lamb. So Jesus, the lamb that was slain, who comes in meekness and humility, and as the shepherd to go and find the lost seeking the heart of God to them. But at the same time, Jesus went to the cross in submission, in weakness. But in that weakness was strength. What happened on the cross was the destruction of all demonic plans. It was the salvation of mankind. He was the lion. So we are called to be as gentle as doves and as wise as sly as serpents. So our engagement with the individual, the person, is one of love and compassion and reaching, egalitarianism towards individuals. But when it comes to ideas, ideologies, we are called to stand as a lion and attack them and fight back and push against them. So I think if you have a series that does that clearly and carefully in the church, you're going to have a much more robust outcome than if you just preach against a single concept.
Okay. Maybe I will give a rejoinder a bit, especially because when we see other sins like, corruption and all that, we have seen preachers stand boldly in the pulpit and preach particularly against corruption or theft and so it was more in light of that how then you address that. But perhaps you could deal with that as you also tell us. When we deal with the philosophy or the ideology aspect of this, which you have actually said that it is nested in postmodernism, when they begin to compel compliance, when they begin to use legal force, say, to compel compliance to their ideology, how should Christians respond?
So I think in that sense, Christians have a absolute clear mandate to respond, push back against that. That is a short step away from a totalitarian society. When government compels speech and says how you must speak, a government can restrict speech. So there's certain things that you may not say, incitement to violence, but to make you say something, particularly in Western culture, Western legal jurisprudence, is almost unheard of. So where great care must be taken in a society is not to cede that ground on the basis of political correctness. So we have a desire to show respect and compassion to individuals, but that doesn't extend to allowing a totalitarian or controlling system being put into place. So that is a core thing. So I would be engaging from a legal perspective, and we have started doing work like that in South Africa in preparation for that should it happen. And I think we must aggressively and legally contend in the courts on those sides. The Constitution allows, our Constitution, the African Constitution allows for freedom of expression and freedom of religion, freedom of association. When you start to compel those, you infringe on those freedoms.
Okay, let me just quickly check the questions in there. There are some questions that have come. Well, my machine seems to not be obedient.
Can you see them?
Yeah, I can see them over here. I see question number 1. As a Christian who is a scientist, where do you stand with the transitioning of children to the preferred gender? I'm going to make a distinction here between children with what I would call persistent gender dysphoria. These are individuals that the 1 in 50,000, 1 in 30,000 individuals who have long-standing psychiatric complications as a result of their psychological dysfunction. The first principle that I would say is that if we believe that we are created as both spirit and flesh in one, I don't think it makes philosophical sense to damage the body to relieve damage in the mind. I think that the principle is warped. It doesn't make sense that I need to mutilate my body in the hope that it will improve some of my psychological distress. from a Christian viewpoint, when I look at that, I have deep concerns about it. God is created in a certain order, in a certain way. And to break that is to move the body. You know, you've got a healthy body, you've got a well-functioning, normal body, and you take it and then you cut it and you give it hormonal medication that you need to continue doing for the rest of your life, with side effects to that have long-term complications potentially. So that bothers me a lot. I have big concerns about it. I need to balance that with the fact that in those individuals who do not go through that transition or do not get some type of therapy, they have really, really bad outcomes, massively high rates of suicide. So if I look at the literature supporting it from a medical side, I'm concerned about the quality of that research. I'd like to see the research being conducted in clinical trials. I think there should be a moratorium on the transition of children underneath the age of 16. Once a child is 18, it's their decision as to which direction they will go.
Is that never mind the fact that transitioning may be affected if it is done later after puberty?
Yeah, so the data from that, you know, the late transitions show bad outcome. So in an adult, I would say that the data is not actually going to solve your problem. We need to have a look at something else, and we need an alternative intervention. I don't know what that is. I don't know what it looks like because there hasn't been enough research around it at all. For the children, I'm profoundly worried about the 80% of children that are going to undergo hormonal surgery, hormonal therapy or surgery. Might never actually have needed it. Once you embark on this process of gender affirming therapy, about 90 to 95% of the patients will persist. So once you start acting into the role, you don't get out of it again. So that worries me a lot. What is more concerning is that there's this big rash of individuals, teenage, often girls, who are now coming out as saying they are transgender, and they have no previous history of gender dysphoria. I am profoundly resistant to those individuals being given hormonal therapy or surgery. There is strong evidence to suggest they are a totally different group, that the psychology behind this is being driven by almost like a craze or peer pressure, and that really makes me worried, as it does a lot of other clinicians. Yeah.
So there's a question somebody asked: does one choose his sexual orientation, or what is the interplay between gender and identity and sexual orientation?
Okay, so no, I don't. I think some people do choose their sexual orientation. Most people would believe that they don't choose their sexual orientation, that it is, you are born with that. I think for the most part, I think I agree with it. So I think if you look at the studies looking at gender identity, if you take a boy who has no gender dysphoria and you consistently dress him as a girl and socially during his formative years push him towards acting and expressing as a girl, you will be able to mold his identity in that direction. So I think that sexual orientation, percentages are born in a specific with a sexual orientation, but I think society is able to pressurize that and increase that and modulate it in some way. So what is the interplay between gender identity and sexual orientation? So they are not necessarily the same. Often they can be very different from one another. Unfortunately, the human mind is it doesn't function in these little categories of perfection. This is just gender identity, this is sexual orientation. There's obviously overlap and spill over between those categories. What is driving the individual, what is important for them, what do they seek to achieve. So there is interplay between them. What it is exactly, I don't know. I'm not sure any of us know exactly what the interplay is and how they cross-link with one another.
Okay. Um, you have said, and I won't quote you verbatim, but you have said that, for example, if you dress a child from the time they were born, maybe a boy child, like a girl, and model them in a particular way, they will grow to, you will change their identity somehow at some point. And that leads me to ask the question, considering the strength of the postmodernist movement and the radical left pushing this agenda so strongly, complete with the political wing and an aspect of compulsion through legal policies and everything like that. Would we be doing it wrong if we decided to ban, say, movies or any other artworks that seem to be propagating this postmodernist agenda?
So let me just make a small correction. I don't say that it will change their gender identity. I say it would have a significant impact on the gender identity. I think certain individual would be strong enough to push back against that, but it is children's identity, sexual identity is malleable. It's not cast in stone. And so, yes, culture and what you look at and what you engage in feeds back into your psyche as to, you know, what is acceptable, what is around you. So you can get societies in which children become hypersexualized as a result of exposure to pornography or sexual imagery. Music has that effect as well, the themes that are spoken about in music. So the question as to banning, there's this little song they used to sing it when we were children. It says, "Be careful, little eyes, what you see. There's a Father up above looking down in tender love." So we have a responsibility to protect our children. We have, as adults, have a responsibility to watch what we read and what we see. I don't know if you can ban it in a pluralistic society. Our society is better where there is less violence and less sexual immorality displayed on television screens and in movies. Definitely, I think so. But is that a society? Is that something that you can ban or you can control? I don't know. As a parent, you have the ability to control what comes into your home to a degree. And I think we are asked to choose wisely about what we engage in, what we show to our children. Just as we are too are called to be careful of what we watch and what we do. You know, movies of people shooting each other at the time, that desensitizes your sense of the value of individuals. So yeah, I think it does have an impact. Are we able to ban it? I don't know. I don't know if you can do that in a democratic society.
Okay. Just looking at the time, I am saying that we have gone beyond our time limits. Do you have any parting shots? Anything you would like to?
Can I ask one question? I see two people have asked it, is how do we respond when asked to refer to, for instance, obviously male per female, or someone who's evidently male as female? So if somebody is standing in front of me and we're engaged in conversation across the table, and it's a social interaction, and they introduce themselves as Sarah, but it's clear that it is a man, asking you to address it, not making a scene about it, but asking, you know, my name is Sarah, please refer to me as such. I don't think that I would go out of my way I would not go out of my way to turn this into an argument and on principle refuse them to call them by the name that they prefer. I engage with a lot of individuals of different religious backgrounds and stances, and we treat them with dignity and respect and engage with one another. When it came to, if it were in a work or a school environment and you were told by the authority that you must use that pronoun or that name, then I think that you have an argument to say, no, I won't do that. because all of a sudden it's no longer the individual that stands before you, but there is a authoritarian diktat that's coming down that is attempting to compel you to do so. So I do also that you have to stand before your own conscience. And so if you feel that you don't want to do, or you feel that it would be betraying some of what you believe in, then I think that it is worth you saying no, but then explaining why you would want to do that. Of interest, I've had conversations with transgender individuals. When I looked at them, I didn't know they were transgender until they told me they were transgender. And as soon as I knew the female was what looked like a female was male, I then didn't all of a sudden start calling them a he or a she. We continued a normal conversation, as one would do with anybody else. But I think once it starts to become a compelled issue, or an enforced issue, I think then we need to push back against it.
A quick one. Is the pushback also necessary with inclusion of this gender? I think I'm just trying to say, is the pushback necessary also in sports?
Well, I think that's quite a difficult question and a very pragmatic one, because not practical, a very topical one, because it's happening all the time. There's a lot of discussion around this on the international stage. I think there are two categories, male and female, in sports for a reason. Males are in power and explosive sports are profoundly stronger and faster than women are. If you just look at, that's a biological fact. That is why you create these entities. It seems to me very unfair to take a male who is now presenting as a female and then putting him into a sport with females, often many of which the associations have been built up over time with females, have prize money that have been developed by females that celebrate the achievements of those women, to bring a man into that system to then claim the top prize on them. That seems to be very unfair to me. You are now seeing transgender persons coming through that have been on puberty blockers from an early age and are taking cross hormones. So they are a lot less strong, have a lot of prominent male characteristics. But somewhere you need to draw a line, because if you don't, the characteristics, the categories disintegrate. And what the International Olympic Committee has done, the IAAF has done, is that they've said there's a testosterone threshold below which if you're a female, you must be below a certain level. I think that is pragmatic, and I think it has some value. At a school level, if daughter were competing against a transgender boy and they were doing athletics, and maybe through community discussion you decided, if my daughter lost at this race and came second, it might teach her about accepting other individuals. But I think then you could also make the case that no, that's infringing on the daughter's right to compete within her own. Those type of discussions need to be held at the schools. I think once the races start interacting provincially or interprovincially or sort of national type level, I think it needs to start using some type of fixed guideline. And then I also think we do need to be aware in contact sports, hockey or girls rugby, cricket maybe, I don't know, if there is a physical risk to the individuals, to the girls around, biological girls, when they're playing or engaging with the intersex girl, a biological male that's now that much bigger and stronger. I think we do need to be practical about that.
And being practical here means engaging in activism?
No, I think so. At the school, for me, the first level is at the school levels. We have governing bodies. So if I had a big, significantly stronger male who is transgender, so he's playing hockey or something with the girls, and is a physical risk to them as a result of his size and his strength, we hold a meeting with the sporting committee, the headmasters, the governing body, and say, this boy is not a girl. I haven't accepted the transgender ideology. We have let this person come into the school and accommodated them out of a sense of compassion and respect for their humanity. But compassion and respect that we show to them and accommodation is limited by the protection needed for the other individuals on the team. And we feel that this is causing potential harm and damage to them, and we don't want them to compete. And that's the type of discussion that needs to be had. And some of those things might end up at legal level, perhaps, but that is the basis that I think you should be having that conversation. It's important then to raise the grounds on which that accommodation is taking place. I'm not accepting transgenderism, the ideology, that because you think you are female, you are female. I'm saying that you have got a gender dysphoria that we're trying to treat. Part of your treatment program could be acceptance into society. Out of respect for your humanity, I'm prepared to participate in that, but that accommodation is limited by the rights when it starts to butt against the rights of other individuals. And that's something that I really do think it needs to be worked out at a local level. National, international, I think you start to have stronger guidelines that we can then follow.
All right. Once again, thank you, Professor. It has been a pleasure just having this discussion. It has been quite enlightening to me, and I'm sure to many of our viewers out there. And we look forward to having more interactions with you where you can, educate us some more. Perhaps we could organize a sequel to this talk at another time.
Yeah, maybe it's not just me educating, but we have an opportunity to educate one another. So yeah, without doubt, there will be misconceptions or holes in my presentations, and the more we dialogue on that, the better it is for all of us.
Yeah, but I know learning is always a two-way traffic, but sometimes dealing with and getting information for people who have invested more time, more energy, and who are particularly trained in relevant discipline is important.
Thank you. Yeah.
Pass our love to your team at Ratio Christi in South Africa.
Thank you. Yeah, and blessings for the rest of this conference. You guys are doing some great work. All of the best for that.
Asante sana.
Asante sana. Thank you.
That's Kenyan, that's Swahili for thank you very much.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to come across it a few times.
Be blessed, much love. God bless you.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.